Another poll, another sign of buyer's remorse. Most Americans believe the commander-in-chief is incompetent. And the Supreme Court may have revealed how it might decide Mississippi's unborn child protection law. Ahead, we'll talk with attorney John Graves and hear reactions to yesterday's hearing from Washington, D.C.'s Tim Fox. But first, let's go to Mike Garofalo with today's top stories. Mike?
Greg, what is the Justice Department doing about the senseless attack on Christmas parade goers and participants in Waukesha, Wisconsin, a week and a half ago? That's what Senator Tom Cotton wants to know. Cotton sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland on Wednesday asking how the DOJ is responding to the recent mass killing in Waukesha. Senator Cotton wrote, "The defendant in this case has spent more than 2 decades committing crimes, including a number of violent and sexual felonies, and had also reportedly shared anti-Semitic posts and called for violence against white people." Prosecutors have charged that driver, Darrell Brooks Jr., with 6 counts of intentional first-degree homicide and set his bail at $5 million. If convicted on all counts, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. Gigi Sohn is the co-founder of Public Knowledge, a leftist group that called for censorship of conservative news network One American News and demanded the Sinclair Broadcasting Group, a conservative-owned network of local broadcasters, be stripped of its license. Sohn went before a Senate committee yesterday for questioning about her nomination by President Joe Biden to become the commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission. Republican Senator Dan Sullivan wasted no time in calling Sohn to account for her past attacks on conservative media outlets.
How is Fox News state-sponsored propaganda, and how has it had, quote, the most negative impact on our democracy? These are your words.
Exactly. That was as a public interest advocate, as part of my job. Those were my words. Those were my opinions. But they will have no bearing on how I would act if I'm confirmed as an FCC commissioner.
What about questioning the broadcast license? That would be your job of Sinclair Broadcasting. I mean, are you going to recuse yourself on anything relating to Fox News or Sinclair Broadcasting?
So let me talk about Sinclair Broadcasting.
Actually, I think it's a good question. I just asked you, Are you going to recuse yourself if confirmed?
Senator, I am talking with the office. I've signed an ethics agreement with the Office of Government Ethics. If there is any question about my bias, I will consult with them and see if I need to recuse.
Well, I think these tweets are clearly evidence of bias.
Other conservatives are critical of Gigi Sohn as well. Senator Lindsey Graham said Gigi Sohn is a complete political ideologue who has disdain for conservatives. She would be a complete nightmare for the country when it comes to regulating the public airwaves. While the debate over critical race theory in K-12 schools rages on, the Department of Education is quietly awarding millions of taxpayer dollars to renew a program at several colleges to train future educators in the controversial teaching. The first 5-year grant of its kind was awarded under the Obama administration for a program called RISE, short for Research Institute for Scholars of Equity. Participating students were each given $5,000 a grant and trained in the concepts behind critical race theory for a number of purposes, including teacher quality evaluation and researching social justice in education. And the Biden administration recently approved another $5 million grant that will be awarded for year-long scholarships. They have dropped the term critical race theory in favor of the phrase culturally competent. But the essential message is still clear: impact education policy through the lens of race and social justice. Greg, back to you.
All right, some very interesting questions and comments during Wednesday's Supreme Court oral arguments regarding the Mississippi ban on abortion that could impact Roe versus Wade. The conservative justices clearly seem to be thinking out loud that abortion restrictions should be determined at the state levels. Wednesday's arguments lasted close to 2 hours, with the question on when a baby reaches viability, currently considered to be about 24 weeks of pregnancy. Chief Justice John Roberts appeared to question whether a different standard rather than the viability one should be considered, but reminded fellow jurists the thing at issue in this case is Mississippi's 15 weeks. Justice Brett Kavanaugh focused on the fact that the Constitution is neither pro-life nor pro-choice. So why should the court have to choose? Kavanaugh said there's no good way for justices to strike a balance between the autonomy interest of a woman and the life rights of a fetus. A decision from the high court is not expected until late June. New York Attorney General and candidate for governor Letitia James is calling for the creation of a fund to help women obtain abortions in New York. She says the women in half the nation's states could lose access to abortion if the Supreme Court curbs or even overturns Roe versus Wade, and wants New York to become a sanctuary city for the procedure. James said conservative states have declared all-out war on women's bodies. In a statement, she said this: "We here in New York must set up a fund to ensure that any woman anywhere in the country can look to New York as a safe haven that will allow them to make the reproductive health care decisions that are best for them." So keeping an eye on things for us in Washington, D.C. this week has been Tim Fox. And I'm going to go to him now with reactions to the Supreme Court's hearing on Mississippi's unborn child protection law. Tim?
One of the attorneys for Liberty Counsel who was involved in that case was Jonathan Alexandre. He was with us yesterday afternoon. We caught up with him after the hearings, and we got a few of his thoughts. Here's what he had to say. You heard the oral arguments today. Can you give me a sense of what you thought about what you heard today?
Well, certainly, like every constitutional attorney, you're digging into the weeds and trying to figure out where is the angle that these attorneys generals are taking, or what's the angle that these justices are taking. So you're trying to pay attention to the weeds and see really what's coming out of it. But as the average American, you're plainly listening to some of these buzzwords: life, abortion. What does all this mean? And it was simple. Abortion's on its way out. The justices that are promoting abortion, these liberal justices, they realize that Roe v. Wade is on its back foot. The attorneys generals that are promoting the life and promoting Mississippi's law here understood that we have to do away with this viability standard. We have to do away with this undue burden standard. It's causing confusion, and ultimately it's starting a life in the womb. So from both perspectives, as an attorney, but just as an everyday average American listening to what's going on, I was encouraged by the thoroughness of the arguments, ultimately putting us further and further away from this abortion standard in this country.
You all filed an amicus brief in this case. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So we filed on behalf of the National Hispanic Leadership Conference, as well as the Frederick Douglass Foundation and Priests for Life, as well as Speak for Life and Dr. Alveda King. And I mention all of those names because they represent majority African American and Hispanic congregations and folks across the country. Over 70,000 black and brown individuals are represented in our briefs. And the reason we addressed the atrocities that are happening in the African American community with regard to abortion is because although African Americans make up maybe 12% of the country, they account for over 40% of the abortions. And it's consistent with what Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger has always wanted. They've always wanted to target the African American. Their eugenics and atheistic approach has always been an eradication of the less desirables, and in their racist understanding, it was black and brown. So the one angle that we decided to highlight was the angle that probably needed it the most vulnerable among us, protecting the lives of the black and brown. And you can read our amicus brief on lc.org. It's strong, and it represents the Hispanic and African American lives that are being targeted by this practice of abortion.
You alluded to it in your first answer, but overall, how hopeful are you that we're going to get a positive outcome on this?
Even if this isn't the case that overturns Roe v. Wade, what you're seeing here is a culture that is rejecting death. Even the women's center attorneys, when they're arguing in favor of abortion, kept referring it to a child. Even some of the liberal justices referred it to a child. The science is clear, philosophy is clear. Religion has always been right that this is in fact a child. So even if this case doesn't go our way, and it's hard to know where it'll go, even if it doesn't go our way, I think we've won a cultural moment just in the arguments and how they were presented today.
Now, Jonathan went on to say that believers across America and around the world can pray that the conservative justices will stay the course, so to speak, and that the liberal justices will change their minds. Also, I found out this interesting factoid. Scott Stewart, the Solicitor General for Mississippi, who was front and center in that case yesterday, he used to clerk for Clarence Thomas, so he's a champion for life. Mike, back to you.
Well, the View's Joy Behar and her co-hosts were slobbering on about Australia and their proposed anti-trolling law that makes social media giants like Facebook liable for defamatory comments. The law would force companies to provide the personal information of anonymous online users to the government if a complaint is made against them so they can be sued. In addition, Behar decided she would like to see some changes to the Constitution right here in the good US of A.
when the founding fathers were busy with the amendments, the First and Second Amendments did not have AR-15s in there, weapons of war, and they didn't have Twitter. So both amendments, I think, need to be tweaked a little bit. I'm a big
That's a whole new conversation. That's a whole new conversation.
We make our living on the First Amendment, so we love it. But there's a lot of hate speech and misinformation needs to be dealt with.
What's the danger in tampering with the First and Second Amendments? Well, besides the fact that the trolling adjustments would be used against the very hosts calling for it, it's just another small step to censoring political debate and criticism someone doesn't care for. After all, Patrick Henry never said, "Give me liberty" or "give me likes." Greg, back to you.
All right. Loudoun County, Virginia has been ground zero for the battle between school boards and parents over everything from critical race theory to transgender policies. The controversies cost the Democrats the governor's mansion in Virginia this year. Well, there's a lot of leftover anger over a cover-up that came to light in recent months of 2 separate sexual assaults by a male student using the girls' bathroom under the district's transgender policy. The student was quietly moved from one school to the other, where he committed a second assault. He's been found guilty of the first, but the parents were furious that the superintendent flat out denied knowledge of the attacks despite leaked emails this fall that proved otherwise. One school board member has since resigned, but parents are calling for at least 2 other members to be recalled. Despite the public uproar, the board was considering a new policy to limit the number of people and amount of time for public comments. Parents say attempts to further silence them does not rebuild their broken trust and say they will press on with the recall campaign. Okay, here we go. Let's bring in attorney and Victory News contributor John Graves. John, real quick, President Biden's going to give us a speech about the new Omicron plan later today. Do you think he'll be able to slow the spread of this thing?
No, he won't. Actually, the opposite. The governors like DeSantis in Florida who left their states open have the lowest COVID rate per capita of anybody in the country. So it's probably going to be the opposite. However, as I said Tuesday, look for this to be, whether it's Delta or this variant or some other one, they're going to try to use this to bootstrap in changing all the rules for election integrity and make it easier for people to cheat.
Right. All right, let's talk about the Supreme Court. I've been waiting to hear your thoughts on this. After the hearings yesterday on Mississippi's unborn life protection law, where do you think the court is headed on the Roe v. Wade case?
I think they're going to significantly cut it back. They're going to go in the right direction, which is getting back to the original text of the Constitution, which doesn't even mention this. The person we talked about on Tuesday before the oral arguments to watch was Kavanaugh, and there were 2 different positions Kavanaugh took. Number one, he was very, very clear that the court shouldn't be doing this anyway. It's not in the Constitution, for or against. They need to push it back to the states and then let the states decide. Push it back to Congress, which is where this should be done. But the second thing he made a big deal of, which Clarence Thomas also did, is there's 2 rights at stake here. There's the stake of the unborn life, but then the mother. So we have competing interests of these 2 things, and we've only talked about one, not the other. And so I look for them to significantly curtail. I don't see that they'll completely erase it in one case, but they might.
Yeah, okay, so they come back together on Friday, and what happens then? We won't get a result until later.
Yeah, there's a secret ballot that they do, I think, on Wednesdays and Fridays, where after oral arguments, they'll kind of do a straw poll. But honestly, they already know where they are. They've already read all the briefs and all the different positions. The oral argument, honestly, is maybe 5% of their total makeup. And it's them trying to, you saw Roberts, who's worried mostly about his reputation because it's the Roberts court, trying to make a compromise. They weren't going for it. And we were watching Kavanaugh, we were watching Barrett. She brought up the Safe Haven Act where you can have adoptions, and she's adopted kids. So those are new members to the court. So I expect this to be significantly gutted, if not completely thrown out.
Okay, New York's Attorney General Letitia James wants to fully fund abortions and make the Big Apple an abortion sanctuary city. Will she be able to succeed with that?
She might in New York, and that's kind of what Kavanaugh alluded to. Shouldn't this be thrown to the states? And if it is, New York's going to have a different rule than Mississippi, which was the state at issue before the court. And that's probably where this is headed. 26 states will significantly limit it once they get a little bit of permission from the Supreme Court. And honestly, we don't have time to go into it. But really, if it's a life of the unborn, even some of the leftist judges were calling it a child, shouldn't that child have a constitutional right to be protected under the 14th Amendment?
You would think so.
I don't think we get there, but that's where we are.
All right, let me ask you then a little bit about this Dobbs opinion yesterday. Go on that.
Yeah, the Dobbs opinion is this Mississippi case. I think they're going to strike down viability. They could even strike down undue influence. And basically what they should have done all along is not gotten involved, and the court should not have been the arbitrator to come in and make laws. That's the job of Congress. The court is to interpret the Constitution and the laws. They need to push it back to the federal Congress and to the states. And so it's a victory for 10th Amendment, I think, is coming. It's just a matter of how far they go in one case. Greg.
Okay, real quick on this one last one here. Joy Behar wants to tweak the First and Second Amendment. You're not on board with that, are you, John?
It's silliness, but let me give you one fact scenario that solves the First and the Second Amendment. Facebook did what? They shut down anyone who supported Rittenhouse, who used, under the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, an AR-15. Had he only had a pistol, he would be dead. 3 white men tried to kill 1 white man. They made it a racism issue. So what they want to do is distort all of what really happened. It's not a weapon of military war. He was defending himself against a radical mob. He did it. A jury released him on it, and Facebook reversed. They had tried to shut it all down. They just reversed yesterday, Greg.
And the same thing with Hunter Biden's laptop, all kinds of things. All right, John, thanks so much. We'll be back to you in just a moment. Mike, back to you.
Greg, the United States will be taking steps today to try and de-escalate tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced he will be meeting with the Russian foreign minister and the foreign minister from Ukraine. That gathering will take place at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is based in Sweden. Now, at issue, the number of troops currently massing on the border with Ukraine, Russian troops. Now, according to Blinken, Russia did the same thing back in 2014 prior to taking Crimea by force.
Now, we've seen this playbook before, in 2014, when Russia last invaded Ukraine. Then, as now, they significantly increased combat forces near the border. Then, as now, they intensified disinformation to paint Ukraine as the aggressor to justify pre-planned military action. We've seen that tactic again in just the past 24 hours. And in recent weeks, we've also observed a massive spike, more than tenfold, in social media activity pushing anti-Ukrainian propaganda, approaching levels last seen in the lead up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014.
Antony Blinken warned Russia the United States will impose economic sanctions if it invaded or took other actions to destabilize Ukraine.
Service members spend a lot of time between separation from their families, and it's especially difficult for those with children. But the USO is bringing families closer together through the Bob Hope Reading Legacy program. It gives service members the opportunity to choose a book, read it on camera, and then share it with their child. In 2019, families shared more than 39,000 stories through this program, with the holidays being the most popular time for families to share. Even when the USO temporarily shut down in-person event centers last year, service members were still able to read to their families, even outfitting a truck in Iraq with a makeshift studio. Hats off to you, USO. Good job once again for blessing those who sacrifice for our freedoms. I want to bring in John Graves back here. John, before we pray today, Tom Cotton is wanting a response from the DOJ about what they want to do with this tragedy at the Christmas parade. Once again, a thing that's being underreported because it doesn't fit the narrative. John, your thought?
That's right. And I don't think he's going to get much help. The DOJ is calling parents who want to get involved in the school board domestic terrorists, and they're now putting them on a list. That's where the resources the FBI under the DOJ is using. So I don't think he's going to get a lot. But him and Cruz fighting for these federal judges that are hating conservatives. We saw this under the Obama administration, and it's happening again. And I thank God for people like Cotton and Cruz that are speaking out on these things. And we need to do it as believers to be salt and light in school boards all the way up.
We're trying to do our best here to bring you the truth and let you decide things. 2014, you heard that about Russia and Ukraine, 2014. And I just thought when I heard the story, well, who was president and vice president when Russia last invaded Ukraine in 2014?
Yeah.
John, do you know?
Biden was there as the vice president, Obama was the president, and the problem with the aggression that you're seeing from Russia is they know he's a weak president. Reagan did it, peace through strength. You saw that with Trump. He brought peace to the Middle East. It was historic, and nobody wanted to talk. But again, what you said earlier, it doesn't fit the narrative. So when a black man says, I want to go kill white people, and he does it, it's very underreported. When a white man defends himself against white people who want to kill him, but it was at a BLM rally, so we're going to call it racism. It's if you just hold to the same standards of truth and decency, but speak up. Believers have to speak up. We can't be silent.
John, I want you to pray concerning this court in particular, because they'll meet again on Friday with their ballots.
Yes.
And would you lead us in prayer, please?
I'd love to. God, we just pray that the 9 Supreme Court justices would do the right thing and protect the life of the unborn. They would strike Roe v. Wade all the way down. It was erroneously decided. They would correct it just like they did Brown versus Board of Education, when segregation, separate but equal, was stricken down because it was just wrong. I pray they would have the moral courage to do the right thing in the name of Jesus. Amen.
All right. Amen. I agree with that totally, because you heard in that interview a while ago that 12% of the population is black, and yet they are 40% of the abortions.
And 80%.
10 seconds. Go.
80% of the Planned Parenthood abortion centers are within walking distance of black communities, Greg.
There you go. John Graves, we love you. Thank you for bringing that information to us and being with us today, and Jonathan Alexander for being with us as well.